Dust had covered the dead city of Sarnoth for so long that the wind no longer remembered what color the stone used to be. Daniel Reyes knelt in that dust with a small brush in his hand, clearing grit away from a metal seam that did not belong to any human structure. He had spent 6 years pulling old machines out of the ground on a dozen worlds, but this seam felt different. It hummed, very faintly, like something far below was still awake. "You getting anything?" asked Rosa Delgado through his earpiece. She was the captain of their small salvage ship, the Coyote, and she did not like surprises. "Maybe," Daniel said. "There's power down here, old power but real." Their crew was small on purpose. Big companies sent armies of workers and heavy drills to strip a ruin bare in a week. The Coyote crew worked slow and quiet, because slow and quiet meant they sometimes found things the big companies missed. Daniel liked it that way. He was not the strongest man on the crew, and he was not the bravest, but he was patient, and patience mattered more than people thought. He traced the seam another 2 meters and found a door. It was round, made of a dark metal that did not rust, and covered in symbols that curved like claw marks. No human alphabet looked like that. Daniel felt his pulse quicken. "Rosa, I found a door. It's sealed, but the lock still has power." There was a pause. "Don't touch it yet. Wait for Victor." Victor Holt was the muscle of the crew, a big man who carried a rifle everywhere and trusted machines more than people. He arrived 10 minutes later, breathing hard from the climb down into the ruin, and looked at the door with the flat, hungry expression he always had when he smelled money. "That's not scrap tech," Victor said. "That's something old, something nobody's cracked before." "Which is exactly why we should be careful," Daniel said. Victor ignored him and pulled a cutting tool from his belt. Daniel wanted to stop him, but there was no time. Victor pressed the tool against the seam of the door, and the symbols on its surface began to glow a dull orange, like coals waking up in a dead fire. Then, with a groan of metal that had not moved in longer than human history, the door split open. Behind it was not a room full of treasure. It was a chamber, round and tall, with a strange stone floor shaped like the inside of a shell. And in the center of that chamber, curled around a raised platform, was something enormous. At first Daniel thought it was a statue. It had the shape of a huge reptile, long and lean, with wings folded tight against a body covered in dark, cracked scales. Its head was lowered, resting on its front legs, and dust had gathered on its back like snow on a mountain. But then one eye opened. It was gold, and it looked directly at Daniel. Victor swore and raised his rifle. Back up now." The creature moved faster than something that size should have been able to move. It rose in one motion, wings snapping open and knocking loose stone from the ceiling, and let out a sound that was not quite a roar and not quite a scream. It was a sound of pain and confusion and something older than either. "Don't shoot," Daniel yelled, but Victor already had. The shot cracked off the creature's shoulder and did nothing but make it angrier. It lunged, not at Daniel, but at Victor, slamming him against the chamber wall with one clawed foot and pinning him there. Daniel's mind raced. Every instinct told him to run. Instead, he stepped forward, hands raised, empty. "Wait," he said, his voice shaking but steady enough to be heard. "We're not here to hurt you. We didn't know you were here." The creature turned its head toward him. Up close, its eye was not cold or empty like an animal's. There was thought behind it, old and tired and full of grief. It made a low sound, almost like words trying to form after 10,000 years of silence. "He's starving," Daniel realized suddenly. Beneath the scars and the dust, the creature's ribs showed clearly through its hide. Whatever had kept it alive in this sealed chamber for so long, it had barely been enough. "Victor, stop struggling. You're making it worse." Victor, pinned and pale, went still. The creature held him a moment longer, judging, and then released him, letting him drop to the floor and scramble back toward the door. Its attention returned fully to Daniel, and for a long moment neither of them moved. Daniel slowly reached into his pack and pulled out a ration bar, the kind the crew carried for long dig days. He set it on the ground and stepped back. The creature's nostrils flared. It lowered its huge head, sniffed the small offering, and then, carefully, almost gently, took it. "My name is Daniel," he said, not knowing if it could understand him, only knowing that saying something felt better than saying nothing. "We're not going to hurt you." The creature's golden eye studied him a moment longer. Then it turned, moved past him with surprising quiet for something so large, and vanished into a dark passage at the back of the chamber, leaving behind cracked stone, frightened humans, and one small object that had fallen from a fold of its scarred hide. Daniel walked over and picked it up. It was a piece of metal, curved like part of a broken seal, etched with the same claw-mark symbols as the door. It was warm to the touch, as if something inside it still remembered being whole. He looked down the dark passage where the creature had disappeared, and for the first time in 6 years of digging through dead worlds, Daniel Reyes felt like he had found something that was not dead at all. Sleep did not come easy that night on the Coyote. Daniel lay in his bunk, turning the broken seal over and over in his hands, feeling the faint warmth that still lived inside the old metal. Somewhere out in the ruins of Sarnoth, a creature that should not exist was wandering alone, starving, and afraid. He could not stop thinking about its eye, and the way it had looked at him like it understood far more than any animal should. By morning, he had made up his mind. He found Rosa in the cramped galley, drinking something that was supposed to be coffee, but mostly tasted like burnt water. "I want to go back down," Daniel said, "alone if I have to." Rosa set down her cup. "You want to go looking for the thing that put Victor through a wall. It didn't kill him, it could have, it didn't even really hurt him." "That doesn't mean it's friendly, Daniel." "No," he agreed, "it means it's smart. Smart enough to know the difference between someone shooting at it and someone trying to help. I want to understand what it is before we report this to the company. If we call it in now, they'll send soldiers, not scientists. They'll either kill it or cage it." Rosa studied him for a long moment. She was not a soft woman, and she ran the Coyote on hard rules about profit and safety, but she had also known Daniel long enough to trust his instincts more than she usually admitted. "2 hours," she finally said. "You take a tracker, and if you're not back, I'm coming after you with Victor and every gun on this ship." Daniel nodded and left before she could change her mind. The dust of Sarnoth was cold under the pale morning light, and the ruins stretched out around him like the skeleton of a giant. He followed the faint energy trace his scanner still picked up from the chamber, moving carefully through collapsed halls and half-buried streets that must once have belonged to a great and beautiful city. It was hard to imagine now that anything had ever lived here at all. He found the creature 2 hours later, exactly where his scanner told him it would be, in a smaller chamber, half open to the sky, curled protectively around something on a stone platform. As Daniel approached, careful and slow, the creature lifted its head and watched him with that same golden, tired eye. "It's me," Daniel said quietly. "Daniel from yesterday." The creature did not attack. It simply watched, and after a long moment, shifted its body just slightly, enough to let Daniel see what it had been guarding. It was an egg, larger than anything Daniel had ever seen, pale gold in color, resting inside a shimmering field of light that flickered unevenly, like a candle about to go out. The creature made a low, mournful sound and lowered its head close to the egg, as if trying to warm it with its own breath. "Is that yours?" Daniel asked, though he somehow already knew the answer was more complicated than that. The creature spoke then, for the first time, in a voice like stones grinding together, shaped slowly into words Daniel's translator earpiece struggled to catch. "Not mine, hers, last." "Last," Daniel repeated, "the last one." The creature's eye closed briefly, as if the word itself was painful. "Queen, gone, only this remains." Daniel felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold morning air. He looked more closely at the failing field of light around the egg and understood, with sudden clarity, why the creature had reacted so violently the day before. It was not simply guarding treasure. It was guarding the last future of its entire species. "My name is Daniel," he said again, softer this time. "What's yours?" The creature was quiet for a long moment, as if the question itself was strange to it. "Kesh," it finally said. "I am called Kesh." "Kesh," Daniel repeated. "I want to help you, but I need to understand. Why were you sealed away? Why is there only one egg left? Kesh's gaze drifted toward the broken sky above the chamber, toward memories Daniel could not see. There was a war, Kesh said slowly. Long ago, others came hunting the queen and her line. We hid the last egg and the last guardian, sealed away where none but our own kind could find it. It was law, the oldest law. No guardian may reveal a living queen or hatchling to outsiders. Never. But you showed yourself to us, Daniel said. Kesh's head lowered. I broke the law already. The moment your eyes saw this chamber, the law was broken. I have failed my duty. You didn't fail, Daniel said quickly. You're still here. The egg is still here. That has to count for something. Kesh's golden eye turned back to him, and there was something almost like hope buried under the grief. The field around the egg fails, Kesh said. Our old power dies with this world. Without it, the last hatchling will die within days. Daniel looked at the flickering light, at the ancient technology sputtering its last breaths, and thought of the equipment sitting in the Coyote's cargo hold, stasis units, power cores, salvage tools built to keep fragile artifacts stable for transport. I think, Daniel said slowly, I might be able to help, but I'm going to need my crew. Kesh went very still. Your crew nearly killed me yesterday. I know, Daniel said, but I also know they didn't finish the job when they could have. Give me a chance to convince them, please. For a long, silent moment, Kesh simply looked at him. Then, finally, the great creature lowered its head in something that looked almost like a nod. One chance, Kesh said, for her, only for her. Daniel turned and began the long walk back through the ruins, carrying with him a secret far heavier than anything he had ever pulled from the dust of a dead world before. The Coyote's cargo bay smelled of oil and dust, and it was there that Daniel gathered the whole crew to explain what he had found. Rosa stood with her arms crossed, listening without interrupting. Victor leaned against a crate, still rubbing the shoulder Kesh had bruised, his face unreadable. Two other crew members, a quiet engineer named Grace and a young pilot named Tomas, sat on a bench, watching Daniel with wide eyes as he described the egg and the dying field of light protecting it. So it's real, Tomas said when Daniel finished. An actual living alien, not just old bones and busted machines. It's real, Daniel confirmed, and it's dying unless we help it. Victor pushed off from the crate. You want us to risk our necks for a lizard the size of a shuttle. I want us to risk helping something that could have killed you yesterday and didn't, Daniel said. That has to mean something, Victor. It means it was hungry, not friendly, Victor shot back. You don't know what that thing is capable of. I know it's the last guardian of a species that's almost extinct, Daniel said, and I know that egg is the very last hope they have left. If we walk away, we're not just losing a discovery. We're letting something die that can never come back. Rosa finally spoke, her voice quiet but firm. And if we help, and the company finds out we hid a discovery like this from them, we lose everything, the ship, the contracts, maybe our licenses. If we report it, Daniel said, the company sends soldiers, not scientists, you know that. They'll take the egg, dissect it, study it, sell whatever they can. They won't care that it's the last of its kind. They'll care that it's valuable. The cargo bay went quiet. Rosa looked at each of her crew members in turn, weighing the risk in the careful way she weighed everything. Before she could answer, the ship's outer hull sensor let out a soft chime, followed by Grace's sharp intake of breath. Rosa, something's outside. They moved to the small viewport near the loading ramp, and what they saw made even Victor go still. Kesh stood at the edge of the ruins, wings folded, massive body lowered close to the ground in a posture that looked almost submissive. It had followed Daniel back, moving quietly enough that none of the ship's outer sensors had caught it until now. As they watched, Kesh lowered its great head all the way to the dust in a gesture that needed no translation. It was not a threat, it was a plea. It's asking, Daniel said softly. It came here itself, unarmed, in front of all of us. It's putting itself completely at our mercy. Rosa stared out at the creature for a long moment. 10,000 years of guarded secrecy, and here was the last of an ancient species kneeling in the dirt in front of a handful of tired salvage workers, because it had run out of any other options. "Get the mobile stasis unit," Rosa finally said, "and the spare power core. We're moving fast, and we're doing this quiet." Victor opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again, looking out at the kneeling creature. Whatever hardness lived in him, it was not entirely immune to what he was seeing. "Fine," he muttered, "but if that thing turns on us, I'm not holding back a second time." "It won't," Daniel said, though he had no way to promise that for certain. He only knew somehow that he believed it. They worked through the rest of the day and long into the night, hauling equipment down into the ruins under the beam of portable lights. Grace, the engineer, examined the failing stasis field around the egg with careful hands, muttering calculations under her breath as she compared the alien technology to their own salvage gear. "It's not compatible," she finally admitted, frustration clear in her voice. "Different power signature entirely. I can't just plug our core into their field." Daniel's stomach sank. "Can you build a bridge, something that converts the power?" Grace considered it, chewing her lip. "Maybe. It'll be rough, and I can't promise it'll hold long term, but it might buy us time." "Time is all we need right now," Daniel said. Kesh watched the humans work with a strange mixture of fear and desperate hope in its golden eyes, occasionally letting out low sounds that Daniel had begun to recognize as worry rather than threat. It did not interfere, did not push closer than necessary, as if understanding instinctively that trust, once given, could still be broken by too much pressure. By the time Grace finally connected her makeshift bridge to the failing field, everyone in the chamber was exhausted, covered in dust and sweat. For a long, terrible moment, nothing happened. The flickering light around the egg continued to stutter weakly. Then slowly it steadied. The dim gold glow brightened, smoothed, and settled into a soft, constant shimmer. Grace let out a breath she had clearly been holding. "It's stable, for now." Kesh moved forward at last, lowering its great head close to the egg, close to the small, steady light protecting it, and made a sound unlike anything Daniel had heard from the creature before. It was, unmistakably, relief. Rosa stepped back, wiping sweat from her forehead, and looked at Daniel. "All right," she said, "we've bought it time, but this isn't over and you know it." Daniel nodded, looking at the stabilized egg, at the exhausted but relieved dragon curled protectively around it, and at his tired, dust-covered crew standing together in the dark ruin. "No," he agreed quietly. "It's just beginning." 3 days passed quietly, and for the first time since landing on Sarnoth, Daniel allowed himself to hope things might actually work out. The makeshift bridge Grace had built kept the egg's field steady, and Kesh had begun to trust the crew enough to let them work nearby without watching their every move like a hawk. Small conversations happened between tasks. Tomas taught Kesh a few simple human words, and in exchange, Kesh taught them how to read some of the old symbols carved into the ruin walls. It felt, briefly, like something good was growing out of all that dust and history. It ended on the 4th morning, when Tomas came sprinting into the chamber, face pale, shouting that something was approaching from orbit. "Ships," he said, breathless. "Big ones, not ours." Daniel's stomach dropped. He looked at Rosa, who was already running calculations on her wrist display, her jaw tight. "Combine markings," she said grimly. "Ashfall Combine, military contractors. They don't come out this far unless someone tips them off about something valuable." All eyes turned, slowly, to Victor. He held up both hands. "I didn't say anything to anyone." "You've been awfully quiet the last 2 days," Grace said. "That doesn't mean—" Victor stopped, and something flickered across his face, something like guilt trying very hard to look like innocence. "I sent one message, one, to an old contact, just feeling out prices in case we needed backup buyers. I didn't tell them what we found." "You told them enough," Rosa snapped. "That's how these people work, Victor. A hint is all they need." There was no time for a longer argument. The ground shook faintly as heavy transport ships began their descent outside the ruins, and Kesh's head snapped up, ears flattening back, golden eyes narrowing with an old, deep instinct that had clearly not faded even after 10,000 years of peace. Soldiers, Kesh growled, coming for her. We're not letting that happen, Daniel said, though his heart was pounding. Rosa, what do we do? Rosa was already moving, barking orders. Grace, get every scrap of old defense tech in these ruins active if you can. Tomas, get back to the Coyote and keep the engines hot in case we need a fast exit. Victor, she paused, glaring at him. Victor, you're going to fix this. Victor's face hardened, shame and stubbornness fighting for control. I'll handle it, he said, and turned to leave the chamber, moving fast toward the surface. Daniel stayed close to Kesh and the egg, watching the ancient creature's body tense, muscles bunching beneath scarred hide. You don't have to fight, Daniel said. We can try to hide, try to move the egg somewhere safer. There is no safer, Kesh said, voice low and rough. Not from them, not with the field only half stable. Moving her now could kill her as surely as their weapons. Grace worked feverishly at an old console built into the chamber wall, one of several ancient defense systems scattered through the ruin. Sparks flew as she coaxed dormant circuits back to life, muttering half-curses under her breath. I've got partial control of 2 automated turrets near the main entrance, she called out. They're old, and I don't know how long they'll hold, but it's something. Outside, the first sounds of boots on stone echoed through the ruins' outer corridors. Combine soldiers, armored and heavily armed, began moving in organized formation toward the chamber, guided by scanning equipment that had clearly locked onto the strange power signature radiating from the egg's stabilized field. Kesh rose to its full height for the first time since Daniel had met it, wings spreading wide enough to nearly touch both sides of the chamber, blocking the entrance to the platform where the egg rested. 10,000 years of stillness fell away in an instant, replaced by something ancient and fierce. Daniel, Kesh said, voice steady now despite the danger, take the egg's readings. If I fall, you must keep the field stable however you can. You're not going to fall, Daniel said, though his voice shook. Kesh did not answer. Instead, as the first soldiers appeared in the corridor entrance, weapons raised, the ancient guardian let out a roar that shook loose stone from the ceiling and echoed through every broken street of the dead city above. It was not a sound of fear. It was a declaration, 10,000 years overdue, that the last guardian of a nearly forgotten species was done hiding. The soldiers hesitated for only a heartbeat before opening fire, and Kesh moved to meet them, wings snapping shut protectively around its own body as it charged forward into the narrow corridor, using the tight space to its advantage against numbers it could never have matched in open ground. Daniel dropped to his knees beside the egg's field controls, hands shaking as he tried to keep the readings stable amid the chaos, the sound of weapons fire and Kesh's furious roars echoing all around him. Grace's makeshift turrets sputtered to life, adding their own fire to the fight, buying precious seconds. Somewhere above, near the surface entrance, Daniel heard Victor's voice, shouting something he couldn't make out over the noise, followed by the sound of his own crew scrambling into position, grabbing whatever weapons and tools they had to help however they could. The last guardian of the Veil was at war for the first time in 10,000 years, and against all logic, against every hard lesson Daniel had learned about staying safe and staying quiet in this dangerous business, he found himself hopping with everything he had that it would not be the last time either. The corridor outside the chamber had become a battlefield of dust, fire, and broken stone. Kesh fought with a fury that seemed to draw strength from somewhere deeper than muscle and bone, using the narrow passage to keep the combined soldiers from surrounding it, claws and tail sweeping through their ranks, while blaster fire scorched deep gouges across its scarred hide. Every hit it took, it answered with another surge forward, refusing to yield the ground between the soldiers and the egg. Inside the chamber, Daniel worked desperately at the field controls, sweat stinging his eyes, hands moving as steadily as fear would allow. The readings flickered dangerously each time a stray shot struck near the chamber entrance, sending tremors through the fragile technology holding the ancient stasis field together. "Grace, I need more power to the bridge," he shouted over the noise. "It's dropping every time the ground shakes." "I'm giving it everything I've got," Grace shouted back, hunched over her console, sparks occasionally leaping from overloaded circuits. This system wasn't built for a war, Daniel. Rosa appeared at the chamber entrance a moment later, dragging a wounded Tomas by the arm, blood staining the young pilot's sleeve from a graze along his shoulder. "They're pushing through the east corridor too," she said grimly, lowering Tomas onto a crate. "We're going to be surrounded soon." Daniel's mind raced. There had to be something more they could do, some option beyond simply holding the line until they were overwhelmed. He thought of the corporate contracts the Coyote worked under, the isolation of deep salvage runs, the way independent crews like his own had always been treated as expendable by the big companies. And then, suddenly, an idea took shape. "The open channel," Daniel said. "Rosa, does the Coyote still have the old open distress frequency active? The one independent crews used to warn each other about dangerous sites or corrupt buyers." Rosa's eyes widened with understanding. "You want a call for help from civilians?" "From anyone who'll listen," Daniel said. "The Combine won't expect resistance from outside. If even a few independent crews are close enough to answer, it might be enough to tip the fight." "That's a long shot," Rosa said. "It's the only shot we've got," Daniel replied. Rosa hesitated only a moment before nodding sharply and grabbing her comm unit. Broadcasting an emergency signal out across every open frequency, the Coyote still monitored, describing their situation in blunt, urgent terms: an ancient species, a Combine attack, and a call for anyone nearby with a ship and a conscience to come help even the odds. Out in the corridor, Kesh's strength was beginning to fade. A well-placed shot tore through the thinner scales along its shoulder, and it stumbled, one wing dragging uselessly against the stone floor. Soldiers pressed their advantage, closing in with weapons raised for a final assault. Daniel didn't think. He simply moved, sprinting from the chamber into the corridor, placing himself directly between Kesh and the advancing soldiers, arms raised, screaming for them to stop. It was reckless, foolish even, but in that moment, it felt like the only thing left to do. For a brief, terrifying second, weapons hovered inches from firing. Then, unexpectedly, the ground shook with a different kind of tremor, the roar of engines descending fast through Sarnoth's thin atmosphere. 3 battered freighters and a handful of smaller salvage shuttles broke through the clouds above the ruins, weapons mounted hastily on hulls never designed for combat, opening fire on the Combine's landing ships, still hovering near the surface. Rosa's call had been answered by exactly the kind of people Daniel had hoped for: independent crews with old grudges against corporate contractors and enough loyalty to answer a desperate call from one of their own. The sudden chaos above ground drew the attention of the Combine soldiers in the corridor, several of them pulling back toward the surface to reinforce their own position against the unexpected counterattack. It was enough of an opening for Kesh, wounded but far from finished, to gather its remaining strength and drive the remaining soldiers back with one final, desperate charge. Daniel dropped to Kesh's side as the corridor finally fell quiet, checking the deep wound along its shoulder with hands that shook from adrenaline and fear. "Stay with me," he said. "We're not losing you now, not after everything." Kesh's golden eye focused weakly on him. "The egg," it managed. "Is she?" "She's safe," Daniel promised, though he had no way to be completely certain from where he knelt. "Grace has her stabilized. You did this, Kesh. You protected her." Above the ruins, the sound of battle continued for several more tense minutes before finally fading into silence, followed by Rosa's voice crackling through Daniel's earpiece, breathless but triumphant. "They're retreating," she said. "The Combine ships are pulling back. We did it, Daniel. We actually did it." Daniel let out a breath he felt like he had been holding for days, looking down at the wounded but breathing Guardian beside him, at the dust and fire and chaos slowly settling around the ancient chamber that had held 10,000 years of silence before any of this began. "We're not done yet," he said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. "But we're still here, all of us." And for the first time since the fighting had started, Kesh managed something that looked almost like a smile. Sarnoth's sky was streaked with the pale orange light of a slow sunrise, when the last of the Combine ships finally vanished over the horizon, chased off by a ragged fleet of independent crews who had come from nowhere to answer a stranger's desperate call. Smoke still rose from a few scattered wreckage sites near the ruin's edge, but the fighting was over, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, the ancient city was quiet again. Inside the chamber, Grace worked carefully to reinforce the stasis field around the egg, using salvaged parts from one of the fallen Combine drones to strengthen the makeshift bridge she had built days earlier. Rosa stood watch near the entrance, coordinating with the arriving independent crews, offering quiet thanks and promises of fair pay for their help, though everyone gathered there understood the debt went far deeper than money could ever cover. Daniel stayed close to Kesh, pressing a strip of cloth against the deep wound along the Guardian's shoulder while Tomas, his own injury bandaged, helped hold supplies steady with his good arm. Kesh's breathing was slow but even, golden eyes half closed, exhaustion finally catching up after a battle that had asked more of an ancient, weakened body than it had given in 10,000 years. "You should rest," Daniel said softly. "You've done enough, more than enough." "Not yet," Kesh murmured, though its eyes drifted, unfocused, toward the platform where the egg rested. "Not until she wakes." As if summoned by the words themselves, a faint crack echoed through the chamber. Every head turned toward the platform, where a thin line had appeared across the pale gold surface of the egg, spreading slowly outward like a river, finding new paths through stone. Kesh forced itself upright despite the pain, moving with slow, careful steps toward the platform, and Daniel followed close behind, heart pounding with a different kind of fear now, not danger, but hope, fragile and enormous all at once. The cracks spread further, and small pieces of shell began to fall away, revealing glimpses of something soft and pale gold moving within. The entire crew gathered close, forgetting exhaustion and wounds, watching in complete silence as the last hatchling of an entire species began, at last, to break free into the world. It emerged slowly, small compared to Kesh, delicate wings still damp and folded tight against a body no larger than a large dog, golden eyes blinking open for the very first time, meeting the concerned, ancient gaze of the Guardian who had protected it through the end of everything. Kesh made a sound, unlike anything Daniel had heard before, somewhere between a sob and a song, lowering its great head close to the hatchling in greeting. The tiny creature let out a soft, curious chirp in return, nudging weakly against Kesh's scarred snout. "She's beautiful," Grace whispered, wiping at her eyes without any embarrassment at all. Kesh lifted its head slowly, looking not just at the hatchling, but at every human gathered around the platform, Daniel, Rosa, Grace, Tomas, and even Victor, who stood quietly at the back of the group, his earlier greed replaced by something that looked a great deal like shame and wonder mixed together. "For 10,000 years, Kesh said, voice rough but steady, the law protected our kind by keeping us hidden, keeping us silent, keeping us alone. It kept the Queen's line safe from those who hunted us, but it could not save her from a dying world alone. Only by breaking that law, only by trusting outsiders, did she survive." Daniel knelt beside the hatchling, watching it explore its new surroundings with clumsy, curious movements. "What happens now?" he asked. "Where do you go from here?" Kesh considered the question for a long moment, gaze drifting between the small, fragile hatchling and the humans who had risked everything to protect her. "The old law is broken," Kesh finally said. "Perhaps it is time for a new one, not one built on hiding and fear, but on trust, carefully given and carefully earned." Rosa stepped forward, arms crossed, though her usual hard expression had softened considerably. "We'll need to figure out how to keep this quiet," she said. "The Combine will be back, or someone like them. If word gets out, every corporation in the sector will come looking." "Then we don't let word get out," Daniel said. "We protect her, together, however long it takes." Kesh turned its golden gaze fully onto Daniel, something deep and ancient passing silently between Guardian and human. "You have already proven yourself, Daniel Reyes. If you are willing, I would ask you to stand as her second Guardian. A bond no human has ever been offered in all our history." Daniel felt the weight of the moment settle over him, heavier and more meaningful than anything he had carried in 6 years of digging through the bones of dead worlds. He looked down at the small hatchling nuzzling curiously against his hand, then up at Kesh's tired, hopeful eyes, and finally around at his crew, dust-covered, exhausted, and yet entirely unwilling to walk away now. "I accept," Daniel said simply. Outside the ruined chamber, the sun rose fully over Sarnoth's broken skyline, casting long golden light across a city that had been dead for 10,000 years, yet somehow, against every law and every fear, had just become the birthplace of something new. The oldest law had been broken to save the last hatchling of an entire species, and in its place, a new bond had quietly begun, one built not on secrecy and fear, but on trust between two very different kinds of guardians, standing together against whatever the galaxy still had waiting for them.